Uh, well, should we get it started then?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy Drew Mahowald, and today Drew is going to explain to you what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. I kind of put together a little bit of an agenda, I guess.
Yeah,
This isn't usually my thing. This is kind of BJ's thing,
you're
but
the agenda guy.
I mean, it's not like it's a very extensive outline by any means. I didn't follow outlines very closely in college or high school, so we're going to talk about the Vikings Falcons game. Obviously, wrap it up. Any key takeaways, both sides of the ball. Then we'll give the Skol Scale, each of us, our Skol Scale rating. If you guys are unfamiliar, it's based on kind of a 1 to 10 optimism scale of where you think the team is at. Kind of 10 being, this team's winning the Super Bowl, and 1 being tank everything and try to get the number 1 pick.
The Dolphins, basically.
Yeah, basically what the Dolphins are doing already. From there, we'll kind of go around the NFL, any takeaways we saw from other games, and then we'll kind of slide into the Minnesota Twins dropping the series against the Indians and where they stand now. And that'll be the way we wrap up the show for today.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to read this ad real quick, and we'll jump right into some football. All right, so we're back to SOCOM Creative here. Are you ready to call an audible for your advertising? It's 2019. If you're not advertising your business on Facebook or Instagram, you are losing. Period. End of story. Winning Facebook and Instagram ad campaigns are well targeted. It's hard to sell lawn care to people who don't own lawns. Scroll stopping, kind of like stopping the run early in the game. If you want to get your customers' attention on Facebook or Instagram, you got to find a way to stop that scroll. And lastly, they make money. Winning campaigns aren't about likes and shares. It's all about the dollars you put in your pocket. If you're ready to kick ass with your social media ads, check out our friends over at SOCOM Creative. All they do is come up with ways to help you explode your business and bring you new customers. Once again, that is SOCOM Creative. All right, Drew. Let's talk a little bit about the Vikings and Falcons game. First and foremost, I assume everyone listening to this show watched the Vikings game, so you know that the Vikings are 1-0 to start the season. Finishing off the Falcons at 28-12 was the final score. A little bit of a strange score, but a winning score nonetheless. What'd you think? One of the stranger games that I think that stranger Vikings games
Weird.
at least that we've seen at least in probably the last half decade, I'd say. Probably one of the something like that since the Christian Ponder era ended.
Yeah, that's the Christian Ponder era has been brought up way too much for my liking in the last 24 hours, but
Right.
That's mostly because of the way the Vikings won this game.
Right.
Not a lot of passing. This is the classic, typical Mike Zimmer football game. Like if he could win a football game in any fashion that he chose, it would be this: run the ball, get up early with turnovers and defense, and then just coast to a victory without really any worries in the entire second half. And that's what the Vikings did. It was Kirk didn't have to do anything, and when he did have to pass, or was, when Stefanski did call a pass play, he seemed to execute it pretty well. But it was Dalvin Cook, it was Alexander Madison, it was the ground game that was really the story of the offense. Defensively, it was turnovers and getting after Matt Ryan. That was the formula, and of course, the blocked punt also kind of set the tone really early in the game. Eric Wilson getting kicked in the face, by the way, as he blocked that punt. Yeah, but overall, special teams also a lot, obviously block punt included, but a lot better than I anticipated as well. Colquitt was really good punting, and Dan Bailey didn't miss an extra point.
Yeah, this really was. This is going to sound weird saying this because they only threw the ball 10 times, but this was about as complete of a performance as you're going to see in terms of all three phases working together. I said this. I think most of Twitter said this in just some different iteration. You can't start the season better than the Vikings did against the Falcons. Anthony Barr opens the game with a sack, puts them in second and long situation. That sets up the punt, which Eric Wilson, who, by the way, if there is a guy who is jockeying to kind of go from nothing to something, being the latest edition of that, it's probably Eric Wilson because he's taking the exact same route that Adam Thielen took, 5 years ago. Anthony Harris is in the midst of taking. Being an undrafted guy, I believe he's from Cincinnati. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And he basically has done everything he can on special teams, and now kind of the next step for him will be to see what he can do as a linebacker in coverage, not just as a spot starter, but maybe as a guy that's getting more rotational reps. But as a whole, you can't start a game better than that because first of all, how many blocks do you get over the course of a season? Most teams get maybe one.
Well, the last Vikings blocked punt was Adam Thielen in 2014.
Oh, was it? Okay, so
Yeah.
there you go.
So
It never happens. And the very first drive, and for what it's worth, too, Atlanta generally has very good special teams. So to start the game off like that, and then obviously, getting the stop and getting the block there is good in itself. You were setting up a field goal basically from the start of that drive. But to finish off that drive the way that they did, obviously Kirk Cousins completing over the middle on basically a shallow crosser, or maybe a intermediate crosser, I guess is probably the better synopsis on that. And Thielen basically just kind of does a little Chris Berman and kind of bowls his way through into the end zone. And the Vikings get 6 points off the bat, and like you said, Dan Bailey did not miss an extra point. So they finished that off in with 7 points. It's as deflating as it can possibly get. And I know that people talk about morale, chemistry, all of these kind of subjective factors that you really can't put a statistic on, but that's as if you played football even in high school or honestly even in middle school. If a team beats you at your own game to start and jumps out on the scoreboard 7-rip, that's as deflating as it possibly can be. That throws the entire Atlanta Falcons team for a loop. Just literally, what was it, a minute 30 into the game?
Yeah, it took like 6 or 7 plays to score, I think. And it's something like that. And I think while the Vikings in their first 6 offensive plays had 2 touchdowns, obviously that's helped by blocked punt and then Anthony Harris interception early on the next possession, where Matt Ryan I don't know what he was thinking. He maybe just threw up a Julio Jones prayer, and Anthony Harris was all over it. So, and then Dalvin Cook ran it in from there. So that's how you start a season, and that was how really this game. I mean, it was over after a quarter and a half, if not. I mean, it was. It
definitely felt over after the
because,
first half, probably.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was at the point where I felt
because the Vikings got the kickoff in the second half too, which just made it that much worse for the Falcons, where they basically blew their first possession, handed the Vikings points, and then the Vikings in the second half, when the Falcons had the opportunity to take control of the game, just went down the field and did their thing again.
Yeah, and this is okay. So this season is like the way the schedule is setting up, at least to start the year, is very similar to last season. So last season, Vikings had the home game against the Niners. Defense looked great. Went out and won rather comfortably. Not as comfortably as this game, but nonetheless the same. Then you go to Lambeau week 2, come back week 3 for on the schedule on paper what looks like an easy opponent. Obviously the Vikings didn't capitalize on it last year against the Bills, but week 3 against the Raiders at home, and then week 4 on the road against a tough NFC opponent. This year Chicago, last year the Rams. We'll see though, because obviously Atlanta is a much more talented foe. A lot bigger names over there, especially on offense. But I will say, as far as Matt Ryan is concerned, he has been bad against the Vikings, like really bad. The last 2 or 3 games that he's played against the Vikings, Mike Zimmer has just dominated him. I think 2015 at Atlanta, and then 2017 at Atlanta, and then in this game, it's been Mike Zimmer has just dominated him.
It's like Mike Zimmer still has some sort of vendetta against the Falcons from. It was Greg Schiano, right? The coach when Mike Zimmer was the D coordinator in Atlanta in 2007.
I don't remember. That was a long time ago. But I do know he was.
You guys, I think the people that are listening to this know what I'm talking about, though. Mike Zimmer was the defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons for 1 year. If you look at his resume, it's pretty funny because he goes from being in Dallas for all these years, and then there's like a Deion Sanders type year where it's just like for randomly you just play he's just on the Falcons as the defensive coordinator. And then he ends up going to Cincinnati and being there all those years. But the reason why he left Atlanta, I believe it's Greg Schiano. I can't remember. I think that was the coach who literally just up and left Atlanta and kind of left everyone hung out to dry, and he hates them forever for that. And since he left Atlanta, he has dominated the Falcons for some reason. And that is definitely and that's carried over to Minnesota as well. So let's go individually now. After we kind of there's obviously plenty of guys that stood out here. Let's start with the quarterback and Kirk Cousins. So like we said, he only threw the ball 10 times. He did complete 8 of those passes, 98 yards. He only dropped back to pass a total of 11 times, sacked 1 time.
Oh, by the way, it was Bobby Petrino.
Bobby Petrino. You're right. You're right. I get him and Schiano confused for some reason. Anyways, so Cousins, the statistics look in a very, 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 very small sample size. If you extrapolate that out to 30 throws, he would be looking at 24 of 30 for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So overall, I mean, in a small sample size, he did his job. He executed his plays and a couple of beautiful throws downfield as well.
Yeah, I think the last one to Diggs was the one that really kind of caught my eye because before that, there wasn't a ton of downfield stuff. It was kind of intermediate to short stuff for the most part. But I mean, the thing is, the sample size is way too small to take any real conclusions from. And given the situation in the game when he was throwing, he was for a majority of the times he was even on the field at all. The Vikings were way ahead in the game, and the game was being called conservatively. So. There's not a lot to take away, but I will say that I didn't think the pass protection was great in the few times that the Vikings needed it, which I think Kirk got hit a couple times. I think Keanu Neal off the edge was untouched and jarred the ball loose. I think it was an incomplete pass actually on the field, but and then there's another fumble too where he got hit. And basically, protection will need to probably be better against the Packers when Kirk will be asked to throw. I would assume a lot more than 10 times.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't there's been a couple of things that have been floated around after this game. The number one thing that I've seen the most is Bradbury's PFF grade of pass blocking being a 0, which if you guys know me at all, I'm not the biggest fan of Pro Football Focus, but for what it's worth, he did not have a great game. You could say the exact same thing about Pat Elflein too, especially in pass blocking. In terms of run blocking, though, a lot better. But I think that, like you said, there's not a whole lot you can take away from Cousins other than he did his job, which is I know that's so basic, and you're probably hearing
he did his job in a 28-12, but I mean, essentially it was 28-0 game.
It felt like it was definitely a rout. So he did what he was supposed to do, and he accounted for 12 points. He did his. I mean, I don't care how much he's getting paid as long as we're winning. You know what I mean? It doesn't. I know
I see that take a couple times too, where it wasn't necessarily the Vikings fan base, but
people
other
on the outside
media people, where it's why would you pay this guy $84 million to throw 10 passes? So it's why
we're paying the guy $84 million to win football games?
You're up 28-0.
Who does that? Who does when you're winning 28-0 in the fourth quarter? Who other than Sean Payton still throws the ball?
No, Belichick does, or the Patriots do. They get cocky.
I guess that's
remember that from the 2007 season.
Yeah, I guess that is 2 nice names to maybe follow in the tracks of in terms of a vertical passing game too. So maybe that point doesn't stand that well.
I think Zimmer's made it pretty clear that he's not. He'd rather run the ball still, despite what the analytics say.
Absolutely,
he'd still run the ball, and I mean, for what it's worth, Week 1 it did work.
And this is a good Falcons team too. I'm just the one thing that I want to say is I'm very, very curious if the Vikings don't jump out 7-0 right away. I'm very curious what this game looks like because you do not want to get on a shootout with the Atlanta Falcons. And I really think that initial drive set the tone for everything that happened right afterwards.
Yeah. But I'm very encouraged in this hypothetical. I'm very encouraged by how the Vikings defended Matt Ryan in the past.
Absolutely.
To kind of believe that the Vikings would have kept them in check. Kind of like I said before the game, that 21-point marker. Yeah. I think that would have been the difference still. But I mean, Dalvin Cook had more yards per run than Julio Jones had yards per catch.
This is true. Is that true?
It's true.
Wow.
Julio was 6 for 31 and the garbage time touchdown.
He averaged 5.2 and Dalvin averaged 5.3. That's funny.
Yeah.
And if you include the overall targets too, so Julio was targeted 11 times, which is about 3 yards per target, which is considerably
bad,
worse.
By the way. That's awful. Well, it's good if you're talking defense. Also, I will mention that I think one of my bold predictions for the season was Vikings were going to be under 26% on third down defense.
Yeah. And
the Falcons were 2 for 8 yesterday.
25%. Good start.
Yeah.
All right, over to Dalvin Cook then, who is really the story of this game. We mentioned it in the preview for this game. The zone blocking scheme, the difference that this was going to make. Gary Kubiak implementing his style of offense, which has worked wonders in the past for a number of different running backs. We got our first kind of sample of what that's going to look like, and that was 38 rushing attempts in a total of 49 offensive plays. So
Yeah.
Cook is definitely the standout player here. I think that, in terms of overreaction Monday, he looks like a bona fide superstar, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. When he's healthy, in terms of being a ball carrier, there aren't many better than him in football right now. It still wows me, the acceleration to the edge he has.
For sure.
Like at some of these zoned runs where it just seems like he's going in fast forward a little bit compared to DBs and linebackers on the opposing defense. That first run, I think kind of the first long run he had when he ended up kind of delivering a shot to Deion Jones at the end. That was kind of the one where I really noticed the extra burst compared to anybody else on the field. He just hasn't. And in games where the Vikings will need to, control the clock, or they have that early lead, and there's probably going to be a lot of these games, that's kind of what you get with this defense is those 3 and outs, get a quick score on offense, and then you're all of a sudden ahead and can kind of, from there, Zimmer's going to want to control the clock. This is the running back to have, I think.
Absolutely. There's a couple things that stand out with Dalvin Cook. The first one being the division, the ability to find that hole on the edge. If there is anything I didn't particularly like about this game, I didn't think the inside runs were particularly effective. Part of that is on Pat Elflein and Garrett Bradbury and Josh Klein, for that matter, I suppose. And part of that is on Grady Jarrett for being a dominant force.
There was one swim move he had on Elflein that it was the quickest. It was Aaron Donald just destroyed him. I think it was Madison that took the loss actually on it, but either way.
Yeah, regardless, the inside runs were not nearly as effective, but being able to get to that edge and, more importantly, beating everyone, literally everyone, the linebackers, defensive backs, everyone to that edge and then cutting it upfield. Dalvin Cook seems to be about as good as anyone at doing that in the game today. And the biggest question mark remains, can he do this for 16 full games? And, I would love to run Dalvin Cook down teams' throats all season long, and hopefully that will be the case. But it's definitely nice to see Alexander Madison standing behind him, too, and he actually finished with a better yards per attempt than Cook did. So as a whole, between the two of them, 30 carries, 160 yards, I believe. It was a hell of a
I think it might have been 170 even.
So a hell of a performance between the 1-2 punch for the Vikings on the ground. Kubiak definitely has to be happy with it. I think it says a lot about the Vikings offseason program to implement this game plan and have it be effective immediately straight from the gate in week 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, again, obviously football is complementary and you get good field position off of some of these turnovers, but the Falcons, for when the game was still kind of in question or in any doubt, the Vikings running game was running on all cylinders. Right. The only times when that kind of yards per carry or that efficiency dropped would have been later in the game when Vikings were simply on the field to run clock out, and the Falcons defense was just trying to get their own offense back out there to make up any kind of run. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to take away from this offense other than the running game looks a lot better. That's really what it comes down to. The passing game we can't really speak on too much. Sample size is too small, and then defensively, obviously the pass rush was there. Griffin, Hunter had 10 pressures, by the way, which is absurd. Even Hercules was making an impact a little bit in that kind of third down passing package. Anthony Harris is a ball hawk. Xavier Rhodes is all over Julio. Complete defensive performance for sure. And I wanted to bring up this stat because I saw it and I really couldn't believe it when I first heard of it. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. How many 100-yard receivers have the Vikings allowed at US Bank Stadium?
Probably. Well, maybe Devontae Adams once. Um, no, maybe not. Probably not even Devontae. I don't know. Maybe zero, one, two.
Zero.
Yeah, zero.
There has been zero opposing 100-yard receivers against the Vikings at US Bank Stadium.
That's it's shocking, but when I just tried to think of an answer there, like I can't really. Yeah. It would be, if I had to guess, it would be Devontae Adams, and I think that overall Xavier Rhodes has done a pretty good job against him for the most part. So, on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, you mentioned a couple of the standouts already, but obviously, other than Danielle Hunter basically spending his entire afternoon in the backfield, you have to give props to Anthony Harris. I think that I'm not too shocked by this. Like, I've seen this coming since he was an undrafted free agent signing out of Virginia. Like, I remember talking about him on this show and saying, if this guy can learn how to tackle, he already has the ball skills and the zone coverage ability to be an effective safety in the NFL. You pair him with Harrison Smith, who is, potentially the best tackling defensive back in the entire NFL. It's a match made in heaven between the two, because you can have Harris basically playing the field out there and doing what he does best and watching the quarterback's eyes. He can play with anyone. I mean, you saw his athleticism on that interception in the end zone. He looked like a wide receiver. The vertical was probably 35 to 40 inches just to get above Julio Jones in that situation. That was Julio Jones, right? On that interception? Or was it Hooper?
The first one was.
The first one was? Okay, the second one was Hooper.
The second one was some tight end. It might have been Hooper. I don't know who it was.
My point being here is that this development for Anthony Harris, I mean, we saw flashes of it last year. I think last year was kind of where he put it together. This is the year where he's going to get the contract now, because it seems
this is probably his last year in Minnesota. Probably, given the Vikings cap situation rolling into next year. Probably, if he wants to get all the money he can, it's going to be elsewhere.
Yeah.
Unless he takes a hometown discount, which Anthony Barr has proven, can happen.
Or maybe Kirk Cousins can convert some of that salary. Did you see what the Patriots did, by the way, with Antonio Brown?
With the incentives?
Yeah. Oh my God.
So it doesn't count against the cap because the incentives are not likely or something to hit, right?
Right.
But all of them are exactly one
more than last year.
One more than what he got last year. So it's was 105 catches, 1286 yards. I don't know what the exact numbers are.
1287 yards, and then
basically
13
one more
touchdowns.
catch, one more yard, and one more touchdown than he got last year, which is categorized as unlikely to hit.
Right.
In the contract language. So the incentives that he could get from that don't count towards the cap in 2019. So right. In total he could make 15 mil this year, but I think 5 mil or 10 or 9 mil maybe.
I think it was five and a half million of it or whatever will not count against the cap.
Yeah, something like that.
So if the Vikings could finesse something like that, but I think that you raised a good point, and that's probably something we'll have to talk about a little bit more if Anthony Harris continues to tear it up defensively. As far as the other guys on the field, I mean, Xavier Rhodes did not shadow Julio Jones, by the way, so don't let anyone tell you that he did. But nonetheless, he was very good in situations where he
Julio was in the slot a lot, from what I remember. And J-Ron Curse saw a lot of him. Mac, before he was hurt,
Eric Kendrick saw a lot of Julio Jones.
Yes.
And he did really well, actually.
Down play where they Ryan basically threw a jump ball to Julio and Kendricks, and Kendricks knocked it away on a third down play.
Overall, I mean, it was a very complete defensive performance. I don't think about I don't think there was many missed tackles. There's a couple of great shoestring tackles. I think of Kendricks specifically there. But Harrison Smith came up in coverage a couple times and made some great plays. He actually led the Vikings in total tackles with 9. For people who are interested in that volume stat still.
There was a pass down the sideline to, I think it was Russell Gage, and he went up along the sideline and caught it. Was probably going to come down with 2 feet in bounds, and Harrison Smith knocked him out. That would have been probably 30-yard completion for Ryan. But it's just stuff like that a lot of teams, I think, would allow that completion to happen. A lot of players would allow that completion to happen. Harrison Smith is not one of them. And again, the safety trio of Curse, Harris, and Smith has to be number 1 in the league as far as safety trios go. Safety duo of Harris and Smith might be number 1, but then you add Curson, and it's not really fair.
I think you're probably right about that, but I don't think there's anyone outside of Minnesota that would be willing to admit that because they're just not flashy. Like they're just.
I mean, they are, but like they're on a. I don't want to say no-name defense, but
they're like Tim Duncan. They're just
Smith
very
isn't flashy. I think Jaron Kearse is flashy, but he hasn't had the big enough role yet to like.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair
for people to take notice of it.
Anthony Harris has a little bit of Earl Thomas to him with his ability to track down balls and be in the right spot at the right time. Like, I'm not necessarily making a direct comparison between Earl Thomas and Anthony Harris, but I'm saying in terms of his vision and his ability to locate the ball and kind of bait quarterbacks, I think that he kind of has that factor to him. The one thing that stood out defensively is, and this happened again, you probably didn't even notice it, but once again, the Vikings allowed a 75-yard pass catcher from the tight end position. Austin Hooper finished with 9 receptions and 77 yards. And I know you're shaking your head. It doesn't matter. But the Vikings continue to allow tight ends to beat them. That's the one thing.
I'm not worried about this at all. I'm not. All of it happened in garbage time. I think here's the thing. I had him in fantasy, all right? So I was paying attention to this the whole game, all right? And I think on one drive, the first 4 plays of the drive were Hooper throws. It was like 28-0. It's fourth quarter, and Hooper got 4 straight receptions, and I'm loving it over there in the stadium watching this happen because I watched my fantasy points grow up. But this doesn't bother me. It really doesn't, because when the game was was still being contested, he wasn't a factor at all. I think he had a screen for maybe 10 yards and maybe another ball in the flat for 5. It wasn't a big deal to me. My
point being here is that the Vikings historically have been beaten by tight ends, and this happened again. It didn't matter this time, but I would say that I personally will continue to watch this because when I was doing the coverage chart 2 years ago, I just remember tight ends consistently beating the Vikings for a lot of yards. And while I don't really think Hooper did basically any real substantial damage, I think if there is one guy that actually had a good game from that receiving core, it was Calvin Ridley, who actually I think he played actually a pretty overall a pretty good game, especially relative to what Julio Jones put up there. And I don't know if Julio was playing a little bit injured or if the Vikings just had a perfect game plan to stop him. But 31 yards and a gift touchdown is a hell of a performance by the Vikings defensive backs, and I guess Eric Kendricks as well. You also get 4 sacks as well. 4 sacks a game over a 16-game season. That definitely is, you like to see that. The pass defenses too. I mean, there were so many times where Matt Ryan was accurate, but either he mistimed it or
the timing was very it was close but a little bit late, or
just wasn't good enough, or the Vikings were in good position.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Also, I guess I would give a hat tip to Chris Boyd as well, who was in a prime position to be the fall guy for the Vikings, and he held strong in his rookie debut. Forced onto the field a couple different times. First and foremost, when Xavier Rhodes did his typical pull-up with a gimpy hamstring, have to come in for a couple plays, and then having to play a little bit more than he probably expected when you got the dislocated elbow from Mackenzie Alexander, which we're still waiting to see how long that's going to hold him out. But
probably safe to assume that Boyd will be staying on the field a lot at Lambeau.
Yeah, especially if
McKenzie's out. Mike Hughes is still up in the air.
Right.
You'll see a lot of 3 safety sets, though, I'm sure, with Kearse playing that slot. And then Harris and Smith. That's actually what I meant, but I know it sounded like Harris and Smith. But the Harris and Smith duo at safety in that 3 safety set, kind of the big nickel thing that you've talked about.
Absolutely. All right, so I think that about covers the overall the game. Give me a game ball. Who stood out for you as kind of the difference maker?
Ball. I got to go Danielle Hunter. The entire game, which we saw this coming, given the Falcons' right tackle situation. They were kind of, I think we
did a really good job with the preview. We nailed pretty much everything.
We always do that.
That's true.
I think they rotated guys in actually at right tackle, or at least that's what they were planning on. I wasn't watching the Falcons' right tackle
Caleb
position,
McGarry
to be honest. Yeah,
was
I
in
wasn't
there.
watching the right tackle position, to be honest, for the Falcons that game. It just didn't. It's not something I take interest in. But I just saw Daniil Hunter beating that guy a lot. So that's the game ball I'm gonna give here. 10 pressures, 1 sack, lots of other big plays.
Yeah, and I think that people listening to this podcast would be pissed if I didn't give it to Dalvin Cook. So,
I mean, I was kind of anticipating that you would give it to Anthony Harris. That's why I was going to give it to you, because he's going to get the Defensive Player of the Week with the picks and the fumble. But fair.
Yeah, I mean it's either. Well, I mean Cook is the reason why the Cook was the engine offensively. Obviously, Daniil Hunter and Anthony Harris. I mean, I'll give my game ball to Dalvin Cook, which kind of hangs Anthony Harris out to dry, but he's used to that, so that's okay. He'll get he probably will get that Defensive Player of the Week honor, but
he will. You got the fumble recovery, you got the 2 picks. That type of stat line doesn't come around often for defensive players in one game. Absolutely. He's going to get Defensive Player of the Week.
Yeah, Trey Waynes also with the forced fumble, which is pretty hilarious if you think about who Trey Waynes is as a player, and how small he is and how big Devontae Freeman is. By the way, Freeman, 19 yards. Sorry, fantasy owners.
Wasn't Matt Ryan the Falcons' leading rusher?
No, Ito Smith came in hot late,
Okay.
and ended up finishing with 31, so he led. But overall,
I think Ito Smith is a decent waiver wire pickup this week in fantasy.
I
was surprised by the usage.
If you're a believer in them splitting carries and continuing to run the ball, I mean, I've never been a huge Devontae Freeman guy. I mean, I think he's a good player. I think he's a complete running back. But in terms of I'm not scared of Freeman. Smith seemed to have a little bit more
bounce in his step, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it, honestly. Yeah. All right. So that I think that about
let's
wraps
do our Skol Scale quickly, and then we can kind of move into around the league here.
Let's do that.
So for those who don't know, again, I'll explain it. Pretty simple concept. I started a couple years ago when it was actually a written thing before, but I guess we can make it a video thing now, I suppose. Video/audio. The Skol Scale is a 1 to 10 optimism scale for the Vikings. It's kind of based on how great you feel about the team or how poorly you feel about the team at a particular moment. So I kind of had been doing it after every game. Basically, my thought process is what percentile of teams do you think the Vikings are better than? So a 7, you're saying the Vikings are better than 70% of the NFL teams, something like that. That's kind of how I've thought of it. And obviously, if you're a 10, you think they're the best team in the league. 1 would be worst team in the league. I'm right now. I was kind of entering the league at about 6, or entering the week at about 6.5 ish. I think the defense, the defensive performance bumped it up to 7.2. I'll say that's my Skol Scale for this week, 7.2. And it just really feels like the Vikings at home can beat anybody in the NFL. Any team that walks into US Bank Stadium can get beat. That's why I'm saying this. On the road and against somebody like Aaron Rodgers, it might be a little different. We'll see week 2, and that will change my Skol Scale. But for now, I feel very confident about the Vikings at US Bank Stadium. That's why I give them 7.2.
Yeah, for me, I'll go a little bit higher, and I'll say 7.5. For a lot of the same reasons that you just said, I think that first and foremost, I definitely agree with your point that I think the Vikings can beat anyone at home. I don't care who it is. I think they can literally, excuse me, I think they have a shot against anyone at home. Question mark being the passing game. Obviously, I would like to see a little bit more of how this offense implements the passing game in terms of when they have to pass the ball. I do think the Vikings can win football games with this model, but I also know that there is going to be times when the Vikings are down 7, 10, 14 points. And
that's why you pay a quarterback $84 million.
Right. And
that's what it's for. It's because Mike Zimmer can still play his style of football to win games, but you want the guy there who can bail you out, which Kirk did a couple times last year.
Right.
But you want to see more of it, or I guess you want to see it more efficiently happen when it's needed.
I don't see any reason why Cousins can't be good if he's throwing the ball 25 times a game. Mm-hmm. The problem here is if he's throwing the ball 50 times a game. I don't trust him to throw the ball over 40 times, but if you have some real balance, like some true balance, like we're talking 30 rush attempts to 28 pass attempts, something in that neighborhood. I trust Kirk, and I believe that he's a good quality quarterback. I still think he's a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. And this defense looks top 5-ish, if not even better. So I'm going to say 7.5 with the one stipulation being I just want to see it. It's not that I don't believe it's possible. I just want to see it happen with the passing game first.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I mean, that's kind of how it is for me too. There's still more to see, obviously, with one game and the weirdest offensive game since the Ponder era, as far as what was effective and the splits in terms of run pass. But still a lot to see. But defensively, the Vikings are up there with the best in the NFL, and that's what we do know at this point after one game. So from there, we can kind of move into.
Well, let's read off these answers from Twitter here.
Good call. I didn't want to forget those. We had 3 submissions. That I want to bring up.
We kind of jumped the gun. This kind of came out of nowhere today, but in the future here, after Vikings game, so Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, potentially during Monday night games, we'll put it up on the Unbelievable Podcast Twitter account, unbelievable_MN. And you can give us your Skol Scale, which is what Drew used to do when we were at Vikings territory. Basically, you contribute your thoughts. We'll read them off here on the show, and then we'll contribute our thoughts about your thoughts, basically. So
yes, exactly.
Take it away.
BJ summed it up perfectly. I'll start with our guy, Mayor Adam West. A very popular discussion account for me on Twitter. I know I love discussing the Vikings with him. We don't always agree on things, but
it's one of the few people that I will go out of my way to discuss stuff with on Vikings Twitter.
Yeah. He says, I'll go 7, 1 up from this time yesterday. So he's saying his Skol Scale went a whole number up from before to after the game. Defense played better than at any point last year, what should be against a good offense. So that was encouraging. So he's saying against a good defense or a good offense in the Falcons, Vikings showed up and dominated and brought his number up from a 6 to a 7 after the game.
I take a lot of stock in that 1-point bump from him too, because if there is anyone that's cynical, if there is any cynical Vikings fan that is not willing to overreact whatsoever to anything, it is our
in a
friend
positive
Adam
way.
West.
I've seen him overreact in a negative, pessimistic way. But in terms of overreacting and getting too optimistic, Mayor Adam West at EWestE_ at EWestE1, AWestE1. God damn it. At AWestE1.
Jesus. Good reading.
Sure, hope he listens to this.
College grad reading.
Yeah.
What do you think about his point being that the defense played better yesterday than at any point last year? Do you agree with that point?
I think I do. I'm trying to think about performances last year.
In terms of situational football, I can't disagree.
It may have been
at
like
all.
the Dolphins game or the Lions game, but against a good offense.
I mean, the kicker for me is, first of all, the third down defense, like you said, 25%, which is as good as, if not better, than they had all of last season. And then the interception in the end zone, the red zone defense was really, really good too. So you combine that with a game where this could have been a shutout had they not kind of...
Yeah.
I mean, Mark Fields was covering Julio Jones at the end of the game.
When the touchdown was scored, and they were... The only reason the Falcons have points is because of garbage time.
Right.
I think it was the best defensive performance in a couple years.
Absolutely. All right.
I think that's fair. So, moving on, we have Uncle Luke at L. No, okay, this last name, I've seen this last name before.
Yeah, it's it's pronounced Vihild.
Vihild, okay, because there was a classmate of mine at St. John's who had the same last name, and then that's how it's pronounced. So, good call. I think it's Luke Vihild is his name at L Vihild, and it's. Should I spell out the whole thing? Because it's
HVIDHYLD on the
correct.
Twitter machine.
Okay.
Actually makes that kind of runs well. It doesn't look appealing to the eye, but like when you read it off, like audibly, it sounds good. All right, read it off.
He gives an 8 and says just making the playoffs, kind of like the Ponder era, but feels great about the run game, even though stale in the second half. Defense played tremendously fast. Variety in the offense may worry me with all of those 22 sets that we were putting out there, but hey, if we can run, we can run. Which I like that. I mean, Vikings did a lot of 2 tight end sets, and it worked. And at this point, he's
Irv
feeling.
Smith, by the way, we didn't
Yes.
mention him in the
Yes,
breakdown. Excellent blocking performance by him. He did not touch the ball at all, and he still put his staple on his first performance as a rookie.
Yes, I think PFF gave him a top 5 grade for Vikings offensive players.
He did stick his shoulder into a linebacker that paved the way for that second Dalvin Cook touchdown.
Yeah, he did. He and was it Bradbury or Elfline? One of the two.
One of the two, yeah. One of the big white guys in the middle.
There's a lot of them.
It's hard to disagree with the point that he's making here because as much as Kirk Cousins is kind of the anti-Christian Ponder in terms of his willingness to throw the ball downfield, this was a very Ponder-esque performance in terms of hitting big throws. This performance kind of reminds me a lot of at the end of that 2012 season against the Packers where Peterson was rushing for the record. And Ponder did just enough. All he did in that game basically was I believe it was to Jarius Wright in the corner of the end zone. He threw a touchdown. He had like 130 yards passing, and Peterson basically ran through the Green Bay Packers in Week 17 at home.
It was just Ponder. He made a nice third down throw to Jenkins in that game on the sideline. Michael Jenkins, by the way, what a name.
That's a name. I would not have remembered that name. That's
basically
good.
Just making the throws that you need to make to win. Now, Vikings obviously got a big defensive boost that required a lot less from Cousins in this game than Ponder in that game. But point stands that's the style of play that was only necessary for this game, and I think that's why Luke is mentioning Ponder there. This is a team at this point that you feel good about making the playoffs, but you need to see more to kind of feel confident about anything else from that point.
Absolutely.
Last one's from Bubka at Bubka2K5. That pronunciation may not be right, by the way. He says 8, and I think they look better than both Green Bay and Chicago, which I very much agree with. The Vikings should go into Lambeau and win that game. If they do so, the NFC North is the Vikings division to lose. And that is also correct. The Vikings will be on top of the division if they go into Lambeau and win. I feel oddly optimistic about Lambeau, given my history of potentially liking Aaron Rodgers too much. I don't think I do, but others seem to think I do. I think I generally am pessimistic about the Vikings at Lambeau against Rodgers, but I feel weirdly good about it this week.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the Packers, obviously, on the next show, the preview show for this week. But the main point that he's making here, I think, being you already said that you agree with them, that they definitely looked better than Green Bay and Chicago. I think that's definitive. They played a better football game than both of those teams did on Thursday night. The thing about it, though, I think the question marks being is Green Bay's defense actually as good as they played against Chicago, or was that a really poor performance by Trubisky that kind of inflated that defense? I tend to lean that it was Trubisky looking terrible that made that defense better, although I will say that Kenny Clark is pretty scary on the interior there. And I'm a big fan of Adrian Amos as well. So
Jaire, too. Is it Jaire? Alexander? I don't know how to say his first. Jaire, there you go.
I would definitely agree with every point that he. Honestly, these are very good responses as a collective group here. I don't think that there's anything too crazy. I don't think that any of these are overreactions. Leaving that game, I think you have to feel very confident as a Vikings fan. And I think that the grades kind of reflect that.
I think 7 to 8 it seems to be the popular consensus among Vikings fans at this point, as far as the Skol Scale is concerned. So from there, we can kind of, I don't know how much football you watched yesterday. I'm sure it was a lot.
Yeah, I wear a Fitbit because I try to track my steps every single day to make sure that
you took a lot of steps yesterday.
Okay, so generally on days that I work out, I do 15. I have 15,000 steps. On days that I don't work out, it's between 9 and 11,000 steps. Yesterday, 1,600 steps. So that means that I literally got up and walked around like 4 times. So, yes, I watched plenty of football to answer your question. But, is there we're a little bit short on time, and we do want to talk about the Twins. Give me one big thing that stood out from you around the league.
All right, I'll go with the Tennessee Titans are for real. And this is because the Browns just didn't show up for the moment.
You've been saying this for a while now.
I have been saying this for a while. They are my bold prediction to win the AFC South with 11 wins this year. That defense is criminally underrated. And if Mariota can play similar to the way he did against the Browns, Titans are going to win that division easily, I think, because I'm not as high as high on Houston, and I still think the Colts are going to be a little bit crippled from luck all year. Titans have that division.
So I'll go with the easy one then. Dallas looks really scary. It's not a hot take. It's a take that if you've been watching sports at all today, whether it's on ESPN, CBS, pick your poison, whatever, NFL Network, everyone is talking about Dallas, and so am I. That was as complete of a performance as you're basically going to see. There are some question marks with that defense. Anytime you allow 17 points to Eli Manning, you can't get a perfect grade overall for the game. But Dak Prescott was great, he was literally perfect. Like 7 incompletions on 32 attempts, over 400 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. He was connecting with Gallup, Cooper, Cobb. He was connecting with 900-year-old Jason Witten. They looked good front to back. DeMarcus Lawrence is as good as advertised. Leighton Vander Esch is dangerous. This is a very good Cowboys team, and I think that there's definitely an argument that they are the best team in the NFL right now, right up there with the Patriots and a couple of these other teams here.
One more thing: the Detroit Lions are still the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, that's a fact. They are definitely the Detroit Lions.
The worst tie I maybe have ever seen.
Yeah, that was
from their perspective anyway.
They had every opportunity to win that football game. Obviously, they were up by 16 points entering the
24-9, like somewhat late in the fourth.
Yeah,
and they let a rookie quarterback playing his first career game come back and tie it.
And Arizona should have won that game too, but Tremaine Brock, of all people, dropped the pick late.
True.
That blew that one open. So we got about 10 minutes left here, something like that. So let's.
It's going to be great because our Twins talk can be you, because I didn't watch a single pitch Twins baseball this weekend. So I'm going to let you roll on that. I can look at the baseball reference and whatnot, but straight up, I just was watching football this weekend more than baseball.
And that's funny because everyone's really hyped in Minnesota about the Twins, obviously, but it's funny how little people cared on Sunday when the Vikings were playing and the Twins were losing to the Indians.
I listened to Pardon My Take, this Monday episode of Pardon My Take, and Big Cat said it best, where he said he said how baseball just disappears in September every year because people care about playoff baseball in October for sure. It's a big thing. People watch it every night. But September, even when it's the heat of the playoff race for baseball, football just takes over because it's the you get that nostalgia at the beginning of the year for football, and baseball just takes a backseat to it every single year. At least it has for me, and that's largely because I've just been a way bigger football fan. But it seems like it's that way
for most. That's like that for
Minneapolis
most people.
Community, even though the Twins are very much in the playoff race.
Part of that too is that this isn't really a heated playoff race anymore. I know that the Twins dropped 2 out of 3 to the Indians over the weekend. It really didn't play well. I think that really the big story that comes out of this weekend isn't the losing the series, but losing Michael Pineda for the rest of the season.
I did see that.
That is a tremendous blow, especially considering the fact that he might be the Twins' most consistent pitcher over the last 2 months. It puts that much more on the shoulders of Odorizzi and Berrios to get their shit together. Primarily Berrios there. Odorizzi looked good. He contributed to the one win that the Twins did have. He didn't himself get the win, but he definitely stood out in a big way. He pitched 6 strong innings. I think he allowed 2 runs in his starting performance. That 5th starter isn't going to matter when they get to the postseason. But the biggest question mark being is who is that third guy in your rotation in the postseason. I'm confident that Berrios will figure it out over the next couple weeks here. He's probably got 2 or 3 or 4 more starts left to get it together before the postseason. I like the trend where Odorizzi is trending. I'm confident that he'll be ready to roll in the postseason. He might be your opening day starter or your opening series starter, I suppose. And then Berrios being your number 2, which I don't hate. It's not a bad 1-2 punch when you're piling on towards 300 home runs as a team. But that number 3 guy, you got Kyle Gibson, who's expected to come back from injury this week. That's good news. Hopefully he can get it on track. But after that, there's a lot of question marks. Martin Perez, I'll just say it, he's not very good. I wouldn't trust him with the postseason start. And after that, you just got a bunch of young guys. Devin Smeltzer has had good spots that he's played well. There is a very real kind of idea, working theory, I suppose, that maybe Brewster Gratterall might be a guy to actually start a baseball game. He was a starter in the minor leagues before getting called up. Obviously, he throws the high stinky cheddar, and that'd be kind of cool to see for 6 complete innings if he's capable of that. That might be it might be worth stretching him out for the remainder of the season after this big blow to Pineda. A masking drug, by the way, is the reason why he was suspended for 60 games, not 80. But him, as always, said, "Well, I didn't believe this, whatever." He was taking steroids. Let's just be real here. Like, he was cheating. I don't want him back on the team next year.
My conspiracy all year long has been the Twins are hitting this many home runs because of steroids.
Well, that's everyone's conspiracy theory, and
yeah.
Of course it's a pitcher that is the one that gets bumped.
Of course, it's a pitcher. This team,
yeah. And the one that's like in the worst shape possible too. Like I was very, very pissed about that, because it's like Pineda is a guy. If you followed Pineda's career at all outside of Minnesota, he's a guy that came up as a top 5 prospect for the Seattle Mariners, right? And basically he has slowly just killed his career himself. He started off really, really well as a rookie, and it's deteriorated just piece by piece by piece. And it seemed like he was kind of finding, a role, and we might be seeing, the trend towards going back towards the player that a lot of people expected him to be after he blew it with both with the Yankees after being traded and with the injury and whatnot. But that just really pisses me off. Just that, as a Twins fan, as a baseball fan, I hate steroids just in general, and I know it's tough to say that, especially with Cruz, who's been suspended for it, and Rosario on the roster, and obviously I like both those guys a lot, but the timing, man, like, that's just like, it's worst case scenario type deal. That really pissed me off. I'm not happy at all about that. I don't want to see him back in a Twins jersey. But I guess the Twins have basically they have 20 games now to figure out who that 3 and 4 guy is going to be in the postseason. And unfortunately, right now it might be Gibson and Perez, unless they've got a better answer, I suppose.
Yeah. That's I mean, here's the thing, Pineda. Now, you can always correct me if I'm wrong on this, because again, you're watching the Twins more than I am, but he's been basically the best Twins starter for the last month or two, right?
No, that's facts. Yeah, I mean,
that's
he's been the most consistent for sure.
Yeah, and you lose that. I've already the pitching has always been the thing that has kind of given me doubts about the Twins winning at all in the playoffs, like even a game, let alone a series. And now I just don't. I mean, it's going to be exciting to watch them play, and if I can, I'm going to get to Target Field to watch a game in the playoffs. Knocking on wood that they make it, but it would obviously be a lot more comfortable of a feeling if there was some confidence in the pitching. Especially, it seems like the starting lineup is kind of dwindling here in terms of the lineup hitting against these good teams, these good pitchers. It seems like good pitching is getting the most of in the matchups against the Twins hitting for the most part here. A couple of solo homers here and there in games, but as a whole, the Twins lineup is not showing up as efficiently against good pitching as maybe earlier in the season.
Yeah. They're going to need to pitch. That's just
that's playoff baseball. That's playoff baseball.
They're going to need to pitch. So
you don't win in the playoffs without good pitching.
For sure. And this upcoming series here, it's a good transition into kind of the last point that we'll make before wrapping up the show here. Twins starting a 3-game set with Washington at home at Target Field, and then going to Cleveland for 3 more games. So this 6-game stretch will essentially decide the division if the Twins can do this right. If the Twins come out of this 3-game stretch with four wins, it's basically over with Chicago, Kansas City, and Detroit left on the schedule. But this is kind of a good litmus test for what the starting pitching will be dealing with in the postseason. You got a 3-game set against Washington. It's going to be Berrios and Anibal Sanchez to start. That is Tuesday night. Then you've got Martin Perez against Steven Strasburg, which is a complete mismatch. And then Kyle Gibson against Patrick Corbin, which is about as balanced as a starting pitching matchup as you're going to see on paper. So that is a good kind of idea of what you'll see in the postseason in terms of starting pitchers. Corbin's a good starter. Sanchez has had potential, is kind of a roller coaster of a career, a guy that's had a no-hitter early in his career with the Marlins, and then he had like a 7 ERA at one point with the Detroit Tigers. So he's kind of somewhere in the middle there. Great stuff. And Strasburg, obviously, is one of the most talented pitchers to ever come to the major league level, period. Being a guy that throws between 97 and 100 miles per hour for basically 90 to 100 pitches every single week. So this will be an interesting series. I expect the Twins to win at least 2 of these games. Washington is a borderline postseason team. This is a series the Twins, if they are as good as we think they are, and I guess as we hope they are, this is a series they should win, especially playing at home at Target Field. But this is the type of pitching that you'll see in the postseason, and honestly, it gets even better or worse, I guess, depending on the mindset that you have. With Houston and the Yankees it's going to be the Yankees or the Astros. Honestly, I'd rather play the Yankees at this point because I do not want to deal with the Astros.
Starting pitching rotation.
It's absolutely. Did you see that Garrett Cole 3 consecutive 14 strikeout games?
I did not, but
that's their number 2, by the way.
Okay.
I'm not happy with that. I would not be thrilled about dealing with that in a 7-game series to advance in the postseason. So overall, I mean, I'm still optimistic. I personally, I don't really care about the Twins losing 2 out of 3 against Cleveland. It really doesn't bother me, and part of that is because yes, the Vikings played this weekend and they won, so that kind of takes the edge off a little bit for me. But the big thing being is that 20 games left. Twins have a 5.5 game lead in the division,
and they just lost their best starting pitcher.
Right. Yeah, I guess, but Cleveland's also reeling too. They're not playing particularly good baseball either. They've won 4 out of their last 10. The Twins have played baseball and still gained 2 games in the division. So,
fair.
We'll see. But this 6-game stretch here is really where they'll take it home or not. They have the opportunity to put the nail in the coffin, specifically against Cleveland in that 3-game set that will close out the week here. But getting 2 wins against Washington will definitely set them up for success, and that magic number will continue to dwindle here. Any final thoughts on the Twins before we wrap up the show?
I don't think so. I think you're covering it pretty well. You do pretty good stuff on the Twins.
Good.
Usually.
Usually, yeah. All right then. As always, we appreciate you guys listening to the show. This is something I probably should bring up now. Drew and I are going to transition this to being a Tuesday Thursday podcast moving forward. Part of that is because we just haven't been very good about getting the show out on Monday mornings. The other part of that is that neither of us, really want to record on Sunday night after watching 12 hours of football. So it just makes a little bit more sense for our schedule. So Tuesday, Thursday moving forward here. It also works really well with the NFL schedule and the NFL week. So when the Vikings play on Monday night, for example, it just works out just a lot better overall. So it'll be a Tuesday, Thursday podcast moving forward. So there's that note. As always, you can find us on Twitter at unbelievable_MN. Send in your thoughts on the Vikings game. We will respond to those as we always do. If you're not subscribed already on iTunes, Stitcher, I think we're on Google Play too. Spotify, I don't think Spotify is going to happen because of the file format. So sorry about that for anyone that would prefer to listen on Spotify. That's just not really in the cards at the moment. But if you're listening on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating if you want. If you don't want to, then don't, I guess. But we'd appreciate it. You can find us on YouTube. Like and subscribe to that channel. Any way to boost the numbers is always good. As long as I said at the beginning of the show when we started, as long as the numbers continue to trend upwards, I'm happy. That puts us in a position to do more with the podcast, set more stuff up, and gives us more incentive to obviously create a better product. Simple as that, really. So like and subscribe, do all that stuff. I hate being the guy that repeats all that stuff all the time, so just do it. I don't want to keep repeating it.
You're not gonna tell their dad about it yet? You haven't said that yet.
Yeah, tell your dad. Make sure you tell your dad, and tell your friends too. I think that's about it. So we appreciate you guys listening as always, and we'll catch you later on this week.